his book, and based primarily on Green's information, Kinsey claimed that children could, with the assistance of an experienced adult, enjoy sexual activity from the moment they were born. It was a revolutionary claim that overturned all previous scientific knowledge about the development of child sexuality. But the claim and the experiments that lay behind it have alarmed Kinsey's critics.
Minimum 317. At maximum 1,200 and some boys were being sexually raped around the clock using stopwatches.
Because of our insistence that children are non-sexual, studying childhood sexuality was essentially impossible, except, for this case like Green. He contributed a fair amount to our knowledge of, and I say our knowledge, I mean medicine's knowledge of sexuality in children.
Green was not the only pedophile providing information to Kinsey.
We had the prison records of these people, so we'd say, give us a list of everybody in San Quentin who's sent up on pedophilia charge, and we'd go after them. So we got a lot that way. There was a man in Germany who was a pedophile, and he wrote Kinsey.
The pedophile was Dr. Fritz von Baljusek, a former senior Nazi Party official. During the war, he had commanded a ghetto in an occupied Polish town. During all this time, and in the years that followed, he sexually abused hundreds of pre-adolescent girls and boys. He recorded the details in pseudo-scientific diaries in which he claimed to have masturbated and penetrated the children to assist their sexual development.
There is another possibility regarding Kinsey's data on children, that the experiments never took place.
We have the other serious implication that the data are being used as if they were real in order to generate a whole view of child sexuality and availability of children in sexual encounters, which is based on nothing.
If that is so, then scientific fraud may have occurred. In either case, the reliance on reports of sexual torture of children under the auspices of federally supported research cries out for examination, especially since Kinsey's research had such a profound effect on the entire sex research field. The most obvious impact of this effort is to demystify the taboos of sexuality in sex education classes to very young children. Many sex education curricula now begin in kindergarten and continue through high school, often under AIDS prevention. The message to parents, if we don't begin teaching children about safe sex as early as possible, including every variation, then they may get AIDS.
I remember him using this in his campaign against me, saying Barack Obama supports teaching sex education to kindergartners. And, which I didn't know what to tell him. But it's the right thing to do, to provide age-appropriate, science-based sex education in the schools.
How can you be protected from AIDS, like when you're having sex?
Well, one of the best ways, Magic, is wear a condom, isn't it?
As a result, some schools, and even a documentary presented by Nickelodeon, are instructing children as young as 8 years old in how to use a condom.
You roll it down the penis, and that protects the man when his penis is inside the woman's vagina.
Children are also told how to perform anal sex. At a Safe Sex Youth Conference in New York in 1994, children as young as 12 were given graphic brochures advising boys to enjoy safe sex with men and encouraging girls to experiment with lesbian sex practices that could cause sterility.
Children, he said, 100% are orgasmic from birth. Therefore, children can benefit from sex with adults and even incest, which is illegal, so we need to lower the age of consent. He was working toward making everything legal, but that's all right. Children need early explicit school sex education since they're sexual from birth, which was illegal at the time. Now it's everywhere. They need masturbation and hetero and homosexual acts to be taught to them, which was illegal, and now it's being taught.
The pedophile liberation movement is still at work in America's academic institutions and includes men who design the thinking behind what is taught in America's sex education programs.
It's got nothing to do with science. It's always been political.
Some of the leading pedophile supporters include the late Dr. John Money of Johns Hopkins University, Dr. John DiCecco, Professor Gilbert Hurt, and Dr. Hubert Kennedy, all out of San Francisco University. Perhaps the most influential was the late Dr. Vern Bulla from the Center for Sex Research at California State University, Northridge. Each of these men have either been editors for or have appeared in the Netherlands publication, Paideia, the Journal of Pedophilia, a pseudo-academic journal specifically dedicated to normalizing and ultimately legalizing child molestation in society. Also appearing in Paideia was Dr. Ralph Underwager, who is often called as an expert witness in court cases involving child abuse.
In his final years, Kinsey would testify before legislatures and courts that pedophilia was a less dangerous problem than public intolerance of it.
Part of Kinsey's defense of pedophiles was that children were not really harmed by sexual contact with adults. Therefore, it made no sense to incarcerate pedophiles for lengthy prison terms.
Dr. Kinsey wrote that it is difficult to understand why a child, except for its cultural conditioning, should be disturbed at having its genitalia touched.
Kinsey's argument was that it was society's reaction to pedophiles that caused the real trauma of child molestation. Quote from Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, where Kinsey wrote that when children are constantly warned by parents and teachers against contacts with adults, they are ready to become hysterical as soon as any older person approaches, or stops and speaks to them in the street, or fondles them. Some of the more experienced students of juvenile problems have come to believe that the emotional reactions of the parents, police officers, and other adults who discover that the child has had such a contact may disturb the child more seriously than the sexual contacts themselves. The current hysteria over sex offenders may very well have serious effects on the ability of many of these children to work out sexual adjustments some years later.
He was touching me, and he said to me, "Doesn't this feel good?" And I said, "No."
What often happens, though, I think with a lot of young girls, particularly you're 5 years old, and I've said this many times on the show, when you're 5 years old and somebody is touching your genital area for the first time, it often does feel good, unless you're being tortured or harmed in some way, because molesters are very manipulative and savvy, and they want it to feel good.
I remember feeling a lot of shame because I remember feeling like I wanted to go in the car. If he said, "I have to go pick something up at the grocery store," or something, you know, I felt like I knew if I got in that car with him alone, I knew what would happen. I know what will happen, and I wanted to go because I guess I wanted that special attention, and that's part of the horror.
And I understand that so very well because my abuser, well, I had several abusers, but when I was 10, I had an abuser. Exact same situation. So when I'm reading this in Vanity Fair, I think, oh, I remember that, being taken to the parking lot. My abuser, just like your uncle giving you attention, my abuser would always say I was the smartest girl. He would have said, "She's so smart. I want to marry you when you get older because you're so smart." And so I did. I liked the attention. That is why children then blame themselves. That's why I blamed myself till I was 42.
41.
NAMBLA is the largest group of organized pedophiles in the United States. They're also the most dangerous. They were established in Boston in 1978. And this group claims to be a civil rights and political organization who advocate what they call consensual intergenerational relationships. NAMBLA is in Washington lobbying to do away with the legal age for consensual sex. They feel like they're an oppressed minority whose civil rights have been infringed upon. The American Civil Liberties Union has defended NAMBLA on that stance. In an article in Time magazine regarding condemning NAMBLA, the ACLU said, well, if it's NAMBLA today, who is it tomorrow? And NAMBLA has been a member of the International Gay and Lesbian Association, or the IGLA, for the last 13 years. In 1994, the United Nations, with support of the United States, moved to provide funds and legitimacy to their agenda by granting official consultant status to the IGLA. There's been some pretty scary statements from our own U.S. Senate, too. In a U.S. Senate investigations report, it said, quote, pro-pedophilia groups such as NAMBLA are not as severe a threat to our children as we may feel they are.
In 1994, an underground film was released titled Chicken Hawk: Men Who Love Boys. The film documented the lives of certain members of NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. One of the most disturbing sequences in the film Chicken Hawk, children were being openly preyed upon in a small community by this pedophile, a man named Leland Stevenson. He is shown openly preying upon underage children, looking for an opportunity to molest them.
So what happened?
What? You made the phone ring.
Oh, you made the phone ring? Oh, well, let's see how you did that.
Oh, jeez. You're just texting record. No, you can get in trouble for.
He was so eager to tell me when his birthday was, and he was going to be 15 in less than a month on the 1st of December, and this is what life is about.
The North American Man-Boy Love Association was formed in 1979 as a support group for men who are sexually attracted to boys. Over the years, its membership grew from 24 to 1,500 members. During the day, Bob is a government lawyer. In the evenings, he manages the NAMBLA's national office. In Europe, since the late 50s, support groups for pedophiles have been popping up to actively fight the age of consent laws. The Dutch have established the most liberal consent laws in the world. The official age of consent in the Netherlands is 16, yet adults are not prosecuted for engaging in sexual relations with a child above the age of 12.
What is there in boys that you love?
I don't know. It's just I have all my life been attracted to younger boys. I go back from the time I was about 8 years old.
I thought I was talking him into it, but later I discovered that he enjoyed it a lot more than I expected, because I had been convinced by people that kids that size aren't sexual.
Always heard things on the news and everything saying that anybody who liked boys sexually would be a monster and would kill these kids or would do these horrible things, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to stop myself from doing that, and so I had a war with myself for about 6 years. I went to therapy in many different places around the country, and finally I started realizing that they weren't being genuine with me. They really duped me.
I've never been a child molester in my life. I've never been arrested, and I'm against child molester, okay, because I'm a child lover, a boy lover, okay, and then we love and molestation don't go together.
The members of NAMBLA claim that their intentions are out of love for the children they molest. Yet this cover of a NAMBLA bulletin, which they called their back-to-school issue, paints quite a different picture. It shows a frightened boy cornered by two adult men who are about to force him into sexual contact.
We're happy to be here. We feel that historically we are part of this movement for liberation.
Kinsey's data was seized upon by men like Harry Hay, who read the Kinsey reports and went on to found the gay rights revolution that began in the 1960s. To this day, the gay rights movement is largely based on Kinsey's data.
We are celebrating Pride Month. Did you know the movement for LGBTQ rights got an early start in 1950 with a secret society, and the founders of the organization were former communists? A man named Harry Hay gathered a group of gay men together in Los Angeles in 1950. They called themselves the Mattachine Society.
I used to talk about 1933 and 1934, for example, that someday we should all get together and we should actually develop maybe even a union, so that we find a way by which we could find each other and support each other and give each other solidarity when it needed, and we find some way eventually to help get the law changed.
Though it became obsolete, it remains one of the earliest gay rights groups in U.S. history.
The group NAMBLA claimed to take their inspiration directly from Alfred Kinsey. And while many in the gay community would deny that homosexuality is linked to pedophilia, it is worth noting that the very founder of the gay rights revolution, Harry Hay, consistently advocated the inclusion of NAMBLA in gay pride parades. In fact, here is a photo of Hay marching in a parade with the words, "Nambla walks with me," written on his back. Needless to say, Hay had been persuaded by his chief influence, Alfred Kinsey.
Is it true that a vast majority of homosexual men admit to having engaged in pedophilia at some point?
Oh, yeah, surely. There's a vast majority of homosexual males are on record within the homosexual literature itself. Even the Advocate admitted to at minimum 21%, and we had up to 70-some% by other homosexual publications and researchers, and one of them, one of the research publications came out of the Kinsey Institute.
Dr. Tom Reeves teaches contemporary politics at a black college in Boston. In February 1978, he came out publicly as a boy lover, despite heavy penalties in every state for sex with minors. Church and state force young people to have their first sexual experiences in a criminal atmosphere of guilt and shame. Tom Reeves fights to change that radically.
Tom Reeves was the founder of NAMBLA. They have a story that needs to be heard.
I'm the queerest of the queer. At the age of 14, I was thrown down 2 flights of stairs by the entire football team in my high school because I was a fag. Because of my NAMBLA activism, I was under very heavy political surveillance. The FBI spent $10 million trying to prove we'd done something illegal and didn't. Why are we attacking each other? Why are we attacking, some people attacking transgender people, a most difficult situation? Why are we being attacked? I believe that like liberation, hatred is indivisible. It comes from the same place as homophobia, erotophobia, racism, and all those hatreds I've seen. We're here tonight to support lesbians, to support public sex, to support prostitution, to support gay men, to support transgender people, because we believe in choice and freedom. There are 10,000 men in prison today for sex with boys, at least 10,000. Many of us come here tonight directly from prison. I mean directly. Some of us come here tonight from suicide attempts, from burnings and threats to be killed. Please let us tell you who we are.
I'm 25 years of age. About the time I met Tom, I just turned 14. Things were pretty hard in my life. I spent a lot of time on the streets, and I discovered sex very young. Tom is not the first man I went out with. Today I'm bisexual, but I identify as gay, and I'm happy about it.
I'm Tom Reeves. I teach history. I'm 55. My first lover was 14, and I was then 23. He is still my good friend. He's a prominent Canadian documentarian and writer. After 33 years of relationships, James Dubrow was here tonight, came down from Toronto to be here. And I thank him for that. I've had many other lovers from age 13, the youngest, to age 70, the oldest, but mostly teenagers. Many of my lovers have been my friends for life, and a few have lived with me for long periods.
I had sex with a man when I was 13 years old, and I continue to have sex with older people than myself. I didn't grow up to be a monster. 14 and 15-year-olds, they're very sexual. What's the difference who they have sex with? Whether they have sex with another 14-year-old, or if they have sex with an 18-year-old, or a 28, or a 38. What's the difference? Sex is love. It's not hate. This is my biggest defense, that homosexuality is an act of love.
How many of the boys, for whom they were then in prison, came to visit the prisoner who had supposedly molested them as an expression of their affection for the person with whom they had a loving and consensual relationship.
In ancient Greece, it was common for mature men to mentor young boys, teaching them the arts or philosophy, while also engaging in sexual activity with them. Sexual games between students and teachers were said to enhance the bond between them and thus facilitate learning. In Sparta, military tradition dictated that soldiers bring their young boy trainees to practice and battle. A soldier's courage was thought to be strengthened by his desire to defend his young lover and be a role model. In Sicily, on Mount Eris, in the sanctuary of Aphrodite, boys served as prostitutes in the temples. In Delphi, boys were made to dance in front of Apollo's temple. The Romans, while generally disapproving of homosexuality, considered boys to be sexual beings. Nero, emperor of Rome between 54 and 68 AD, derived so much pleasure from his relationship with Sporos, a 12-year-old boy, that he married him in a public wedding.
He is a psychologist and a senior scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. In your piece, you say someone has no choice to be a pedophile, but someone can choose to not be a child molester.
Pedophilia is separate from child molestation. Pedophilia refers to the actual, genuine, underlying sexual interest. For some reason, and we haven't worked out the details yet, there are some people born with a genuine sexual interest in children. They didn't ask for that. Nobody asks to be a pedophile. That just seems to be the case for these people. But that's very different from child molestation, which is a choice. They're not responsible for what they're attracted to. They appear to be born with it. We know through a series of brain studies, both from my research group and from other teams, that they're born with slightly different brain anatomy. And the differences that they show are not the kinds of differences that emerge over a lifetime. Rather, they seem to be the kinds of differences where whatever the chain of events it is, that chain of events began before birth. It really had nothing to do with any choice that they made. When they felt the most desperate, that's when they needed to, for example, go to a psychologist.
Yeah.
But the way that the rules are set up today, if they go to a psychologist, that psychologist has to report them.
Yeah.
So rather than having a society where people can go in and get the help they need, we have forced these people to be out on their own, unsupported. If we were able to identify these people, for example, very early on and help provide them with the tools to control their own behaviors and their own interests, then we could prevent them from becoming a child molester.
Yeah.
According to current research, pedophilia is an unchangeable sexual orientation, just like, for example, heterosexuality. No one chooses to be a pedophile. No one can cease being one. It occurs unrelated to socio-economical status and unrelated to educational level. So generally speaking, anyone could be born a pedophile. Like every other sexual orientation, pedophilia can have different characteristics. For example, it can be heterosexual, it can be homosexual, bisexual. The vast majority of all pedophiles are men, about 99%. Within the male population, 1 to 2% are considered to be pedophiles. This translates to about 60 million people worldwide. Chances every one of you knows at least one pedophile are higher than that you don't know anyone. The difference between pedophilia and other sexual orientations is that living out this sexual orientation will end in a disaster. People who can't tell anyone that they're pedophiles logically won't get any help. For example, they can't tell their friends that they can't go to the beach because children in swimsuits might be there as well. We shouldn't increase the suffering of pedophiles by excluding them, by blaming and mocking them.
Most of the persons that I've worked with who have offended against children, I didn't feel did this with any kind of malicious intent at all. Some of them didn't see this developing. They were drawn into the relationships in ways they didn't recognize themselves. I saw others who genuinely fell in love with the child.
This is David. He's known as a non-offending pedophile, someone who has a romantic and sexual attraction to kids, but says he's never abused a child. He wants help, but getting it in the U.S. is risky. Since 2005, about 10,000 people in Germany have reached out to Dunkelfeld for help.
Is this like conversion therapy? Are you trying to cure these people?
No, it's not possible to change sexual orientation. I never would try that.
So are you saying that pedophilia is a sexual orientation? Pedophilia is a sexual orientation?
Exactly. We have a lot of sexual minorities, and this is all part of this huge variety. So nobody chooses this.
During our investigation, we were surprised at the number of people who seemed to accept the pedophile philosophy.
If people are having sex and if they just want to do it, openly, it really shouldn't make a difference what age people are.
It's our strict laws that result in so many of these kids being killed by child molesters because they're so afraid of what would happen to them if they get caught. It's a direct result of our stringent laws. I mean, everybody's got to be broken in somehow, and ever since the dawn of man, it's been a normal thing where people, when they're young and don't know anything, get broken in by somebody.